Hey guys, in this video I wanted to talk about one of the key factors that I overlooked when I first started my permaculture journey early this year. And it was something that I kind of knew a little bit about, but I didn't quite consider the effects that it would have on my garden. And now that we've gone through winter and we're coming out the other side, I've realized that I really want to start planning my garden a little bit more effectively around this thing, and that is the sun. So depending on the direction that your house is facing, the sun is going to affect your garden on each side of the house in very different ways. Now, typically here in the southern hemisphere, the north side is the side that is going to get the most sunlight. Conversely, the southern side of your property is going to be a lot cooler and shadier in comparison to the north. Now, because the sun rises on the east and it sets on the west, you're going to get that morning sun on the east side of your property, which tends to be a lot less harsh. And on the western side, when the sun is setting, that is when you are going to get the harshest, hottest sun. So this can obviously affect your garden. Something else to consider is that there are other things that can affect the sunlight on your property and on your garden. The latitude can affect it, so depending on the location of your property within the southern hemisphere, that's going to affect the angle at which the sun's rays will hit it, which can influence the distribution of sunlight. The elevation of your property as well, so at different elevations you might experience varying degrees of sunlight exposure due to the angle of the sun in relation to the land. Of course, there are seasonal changes, so the sun's position in the sky is going to change along with the seasons, which will impact the amount and the angle of the sun each side of your property receives. The different regions of the world can also experience varying cloud cover, so climate can also affect the intensity and the duration of sunlight. And of course, landscaping, so the layout of your garden and the placement of trees or other structures can also enhance or reduce the exposure of sunlight on specific sides of your property. So something that you can do to begin to learn how to work with the sun is to do some sun mapping. Now, you can use any kind of basic map that you have of your property, or you can create one. This is kind of my go-to map for my property and my little permaculture garden. I've spoken about how I did this in my systems mapping and permaculture zones video, but basically I just went on Google Maps and I looked at the satellite image of my property from above, and I basically used that as a guide to kind of get the rough shape of the house and everything on the property. And then I went and I kind of looked at my main garden sections and whatever, and I divided it into my different permaculture zones. Now, something that I have added to my little map is these 4 different cardinal directions, and each of those essentially represents the path of the sun. My house is pretty much east facing. It's a little bit like northeast facing. So basically the sun rises on this side and it sets on this side. So I've got that line there and that line there, and that's allowed me to divide my map of my property into east, north, south, and west. So now that I know this, I can start to plan my garden accordingly. Now, on top of just understanding the different kind of like zones in terms of the cardinal directions of your property, some other things to consider would just to observe your garden as much as you can and make a note of if there are any spaces where the sun maybe doesn't reach, if there are any kind of tall trees or parts of the building or anything that kind of obstructs the sunlight. At any point in the day, it's really good to make a note of that. So I have little sections of my garden that really don't get any light, and that's kind of in here. I have a lot of really big palm trees and a big leopard tree, and they kind of block the sunlight. On the south side of my house, pretty much anything against the house here doesn't see much light. The garden, however, does get plenty of light, which is good. You can start sun mapping on your property to understand the sun's patterns and plan your garden accordingly. You want to observe the sun's path over several days, noticing the movement of the sun across your property. Note the directions that it rises and sets and how its position is changing throughout the day. Then sketch a rough layout. of your property, marking the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Divide your property into these sections based on their orientation and the sun's movement. You can label each side of your property north-facing, south-facing, east-facing, or west-facing. Then note any obstructions that might cast shadows, such as buildings, trees, fences, or other structures, and note their location and height. For each section, you want to measure how many hours of sunlight it receives during different times of the day: morning, afternoon, midday, or evening. You can use a sun tracker app or a simple sundial to assist with the measurements. Make sure to record all of your data in a journal or use a digital tool like Notion to record your observations and measurements. Changes are going to happen throughout the seasons, so it's important to remember that this is an ongoing process and you'll need to refine your understanding over time. So now that I have this knowledge about my garden and my property and how it is affected by the sun, I am going to start planting a lot of my annual crops in particular that I am looking at planting now in accordance to these different cardinal directions. With a lot of the annuals, I'm going to make sure that as we're coming into spring, I'm planting all of my crops in the best side of the house so that they can utilize that sun to their advantage. Because the north side of your garden receives the most sunlight during the day, this would be the best place to plant anything that's sun-loving, so all of your fruit trees that require full sun, or things like tomatoes, capsicums, eggplants, and herbs like basil or rosemary. Because the south side of your property receives the least amount of direct sunlight, it can be cooler and shadier. So this is the best place to plant anything that loves a little bit of shade. So spinach or lettuce, things like broccoli, cauliflower, or plants that can handle partial shade like rhubarb and certain herbs. The east-facing side of your property is going to receive that morning sunlight, so this can be gentle and beneficial for a lot of early maturing crops, so things like your salad greens or strawberries, and a lot of cool season vegetables like peas and radishes. The west-facing side of your property is going to get that afternoon sunlight, so this can be a lot hotter and more intense. So things that love a little bit of heat and can tolerate it, like zucchini, melons, pumpkins, or beans, are best for the west side. So I hope you guys found this video useful. I know that I definitely could have used a really simple explanation of how the sun will affect my property and my garden when I first started my permaculture journey. Rocco wants to play. Oh, you want to play? Oh. So thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, I am really keen to make plenty more permaculture and systems thinking related videos for you guys, because now that we are coming out of winter, my gardening game is about to increase exponentially. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you like Tiana's videos. Thank you.